everyone. I'm Lee K, PCI QSA and ex-digital forensic investigator. I'm joined by digital forensic specialist Andrew Smith today, and we will be discussing the crucial connection between PCI DSS and DFIR, Digital Forensic Incident Response, in Thailand and APAC.
Hello, everyone. As Kay says, my name is Andrew Smith. I'm a Vice President and Digital Forensic Officer, actually based here in Bangkok. The role of my team is to analyse electronic data in relation to any kind of cybersecurity event, whether it's a data breach or a ransomware attack. So today, we're going to explore how PCI DSS compliance contributes to an effective digital forensic investigation and incident response, or DFIR, as it's commonly referred to. And conversely, we're going to look at how DFIR contributes to PCI DSS compliance.
So let's start from understanding PCI DSS. The PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. It's a global security standard designed to strengthen the security of payment card information. And its primary objective is to protect cardholder data and also prevent data breaches and reduce financial fraud. So today, we are going to talk about PCI DSS, and then this one includes 12 requirements. And we are highlighting 3 requirements related with the DFIR. It is requirements 10 and 11 and 12. So requirement 10 is about logging and monitoring and to track or access and to quickly detect the unknown risks. And requirement 11 is about the regular testing and including vulnerability scan and a penetration test. And requirement 12, it is regular, is to maintain an incident response plan. So, Andy, can you explain to us what is the DFIR?
So DFIR can be broken into 2 key components: digital forensics, and we can summarize digital forensics very simply as the preservation, the analysis, and presentation of electronic evidence. Incident response. This is the process that a company has to go through before an incident occurs, during an incident, and post-incident. So typically, there are 6 stages to the incident response process. So you have preparation, you have identification, you have containment, you have eradication, recovery, and you have post-incident activity. So let me just summarize very briefly each stage and how digital forensic fits into that. So preparation. It's vital that a company, regardless of size, has in place a very defined process in how they're going to respond to an incident. So this would typically involve an incident response plan and putting together an incident response team. Now, it's really important that as part of the incident response plan and team, digital forensics is included to ensure that you have an effective response to the incident. With identification, a company will go through the identification stage multiple times during the investigation. So you have the initial identification that an incident is taking place. You then need to identify what devices are going to fall within the scope of the investigation. You need to identify potential sources of evidence. Now, as a digital forensic investigator, we will do a detailed investigation, and again, this falls within the identification stage. So we're going to conduct an investigation to try and identify the volume of data that's been extracted from the network, what data has been extracted, and the root cause to the incident. With containment, again, you're going to go through the containment stage several times. There's going to be the initial containment. So, for example, in a ransomware attack, you're going to want to contain the devices separate from the network to contain the incident. It's vital that the containment process takes place correctly to avoid the deletion or destruction of potential evidence. So again, as forensic investigators, we'll work with the incident response team and to ensure that the containment takes place, but in a way that will preserve the electronic data. Now, when we do our investigation, we may identify further actions and further containment that needs to take place. For example, we identify unauthorized user accounts, compromised accounts, and the company will then need to take further action. We then have eradication. So as part of our investigation, we are going to try and identify the presence of all malware, malicious files that are on the system, how long the malware has been on the system for. Because typically with a data breach, the network may have been compromised for quite some time.
Exactly.
So we will analyze the malware, identify it, then the company can go into eradication to remove that malware. You have the recovery phase. And with the recovery phase, you're typically going to restore your systems from backups, but it's vital that you are restoring from clean backups. So again, as a forensic investigator, we'll work with the team to maybe examine the computers once the system has been restored to make sure that there's no malware still present on the system. And then we have the post-incident activity. So you need to review your incident response plan, identify what worked and what didn't work so well, modify and update your incident response plan. You need to look at the investigation report. You need to understand what went wrong within your network, what vulnerabilities have been identified, what action needs to be taken to harden your network. Do you need further training for your team? Do you need to modify your incident response plan? So these are the steps you're going to have to go through each time you have an incident.
Andy, thank you for sharing what is a TFIR. It's very, very kind explanation. So now when I'm listening to your comments, how do each of the TFIR phases directly connect with the PCI DSS compliance? Just I'm wondering, especially identification phase is very important. So for instance, can you explain about the identification phases?
So within the identification phase, particularly with an incident involving networks, a critical source of information for us are well-maintained firewall logs. So we're going to look at traffic logs, we're going to look at VPN logs, and we're going to use them to identify the volume of data that has been extracted from the network. That will tell us the destination country where the data has been extracted to, but importantly, it will also identify the endpoint within the network where the data has been extracted from. That allows us then to conduct a focused investigation on the key devices within the network. So we will look at those devices. We need to look at the event logs, but a lot of our data will come from the operating system files as well. So the well-maintained logs gives us focus on the devices to examine, and then we need access to the operating system files to do a very detailed examination to identify the root cause, what data has been extracted.
So now I would like to talk about online payment card incident and the implication in Southeast Asia and Thailand. I was surprised there was about 75,000 online fraud cases and damage was like 6.5 billion baht. And it is actually just only 3 months from January to March in 2025. Then now you can tell that the importance of adhering the PCI DSS requirements becomes even clearer to us through actual incident cases. So data breaches are unfortunately very common things in Southeast Asia. So also it is demonstrating in severe consequences of non-compliance with PCI DSS. Andy, can you also more share about the Southeast Asia and other countries' situations?
Certainly, Kay. So from the 2024 reports, what is notable is Thailand is one of the most attacked countries in Southeast Asia, with 27% of the attacks against Thailand, followed by Vietnam with 21% and Singapore with 20%. Now, the objective of a cyber attack against a company is typically not about data destruction. It's about theft of data. Data has value. It can be sold on the dark web for substantial sums of money. They can hold your data to ransom in the case of a ransomware attack. So the objective is to obtain your data. Now, it may be payment card information, but very often it's also going to be personal identifiable information. So national ID numbers, passport numbers, email addresses, personal addresses, because that can then be used for further scams and crimes, as you've heard about before. So it's very important for a company to understand what valuable data they hold in their within your network. It's not just payment card information, but it's your employees' information, everything.
So it is also like very important things that the non-compliance with the PCI DSS can lead to substantial fines from payment card brands, and raising from $5,000 to $100,000 per month. But depending on the severity and the duration, it will be changes like the fines. But beyond these direct expenses, also there will be the payment card replacements cost, and also fraud recovery expenses, and also customer also probably have compensations, and business can suffer from actually the reputation damages, and also damages from also trust. So it's not only that one, but the thing it is also even legal liability could lead to business cessation. I think it is very also important matter.
Correct, and it's an interesting time in Thailand because the cybersecurity landscape is changing.
Yeah.
The government recognises the importance of cybersecurity in Thailand. As a result, the government is investing a lot of money into free training for cybersecurity specialists in Thailand, but they're also now actively going after companies under the PDPA Act.
Yeah.
So in 2024, the first company was fined the maximum amount for breach of the PDPA. I appreciate that PDPA is not PCI compliance, but it does relate. So they were fined the maximum amount because they failed to report the data breach, they failed to investigate it properly, and they failed to appoint a DPO. Now, I'm aware of other companies that have received fines since then, and there's other companies actively under investigation. So the government is taking a very proactive approach to cybersecurity and data security within Thailand. So you can expect that trend to move across to any breach of PCI DSS compliance.
That's very interesting. These cases underscore that the PCI DSS compliance is not just about the regulatory, but it's also very strongly connected to tied to companies' actually survival. That's what I think. So now I would like to move to actually how specific PCI DSS requirements plays an essential role in DFIR processes.
Yes, so we're going to have a look at from a practical viewpoint. how the requirements impact on my work as a digital forensic investigator.
So PCI DSS requirements 10 is about like log and monitoring, as I just earlier mentioned. So PCI DSS requires the implementation and the maintenance of audit logs for all system components. So the means recording who did what and who did when. So Andy, I'm just wondering, can you tell us like how this monitoring and also log that relate with the DFIR processes?
For us, the logs are critical because, as I mentioned before, by having access to the firewall logs, it allows us to gain focus into what devices within the network that needs to be examined. It also provides us with a timeline, so we can then conduct a very detailed forensic investigation and focus on the timeline and the key devices. If we don't have access to the firewall logs, then we may have to expand the number of devices that's going to fall under the investigation. It results in our investigation being maybe much broader than it initially needs to be, and it creates delays in the investigation. So what we want to do is achieve focus, and the firewall logs help with that.
And you really clearly pointed out that the requirements actually relate to identification. So how about like a PCI DSS becomes 11? Actually, 11 emphasizes like a regular test of a security system and the processes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this requires actually a vulnerability scan and also penetration tests and also the checking of the effectiveness of test IDS and IPS. And now I'm just wondering, what is like really related with the requirements 11 to DFIR?
So by being proactive and you identify the vulnerabilities within your network in the first place, hopefully you avoid the situation of where you become a victim of a major incident. But if an incident should happen, the impact will be minimized. It's vital that you have monitoring systems in place, but it's also vital that you're actually looking at the reports, because to have an effective response, you need to be able to identify very, very quickly when an incident has started. And again, that will then put your incident response plan into action. So again, that will help to minimize the impact.
Yes, right. Requirements 11 is actually linked to your preparation and identification at the same time. So now we're looking to a PCI DSS requirements 12, and it's about the maintain and also information security policy and also incident response. So this requirement is mostly directly related with the DFIR, and the PCI DSS mandates the establishment of an incident response plan and a regular testing of the plan. Also, they actually ask really important things that ensuring all relevant personnel should be aware of it. So I would like to also point out requirement 12.10 is a directly mention about the incident response plans. So, and the requirement 12 is a very actually important requirements, I think. Then how it is like related with the DFIR?
It has a direct impact on the work that we do. We work with companies that don't have an incident response plan in place, and we work with companies that do. The companies that don't have an incident response plan in place, we find that their response to the incident is chaotic, disorganized. There's unnecessary delays, which maximizes the impact on the company. So the companies we work with who have a very well-trained incident response team and an incident response plan in place, we find we can work with their team very effectively. They've started the 6-stage process. They've responded quickly, and it minimizes the impact. So having an effective incident response plan is absolutely vital.
Thank you for explanation how it linked with the RECOMS 12. This part I really love a lot. That is another really important matter about the data preservation, and then I love this word, the forensic readiness. I think it's very important matter. So PCI DSS requires prompt reporting of data breaches to the payment card brands and also relevant authorities, like police office and some other government side as well. So, and to this, facilitate about it is an instance-related data must be appropriately preserved, and we call that also legally preserved. So, so this actually interesting the part of that, the forensic readiness. Can you explain a little bit about more?
Certainly. So the very start of any kind of forensic investigation we do, we perform what we refer to as forensic preservation. So what does that actually mean? What we're doing, we're using internationally approved methods, internationally approved tools, which will allow us to obtain a copy of the original data without making any changes to the original data. So that allows us to be able to then perform an effective digital forensic investigation. But also importantly, if required, because we've forensically preserved the data, it can be used in legal process, in court, and it will be accepted by the regulatory authority. So the forensic preservation of the data is absolutely vital.
So Andy, it's time to wrap up. So can you tell us today's key takeaways?
I think the key takeaway with PCI DSS is it's not just about compliance, but it does provide a robust framework that if implemented correctly will provide you with the capabilities to respond to an incident effectively.
So exactly, that I rhetorical about what you mentioned about. And DFI is an essential component for PCI DSS compliance. Without a sophisticated DFI process, it's a challenge to maintain the compliance even with excellent security teams in place and when incidents occurs. So I would like to also emphasize this one, the close collaboration between security team and the compliance team, and also if there is incident response team, are really important matters that preparing the PCI DSS compliance. So Andy, now actually I wanted to ask you, as a frontline TISA forensic investigator, what you experience in a field, and what is the worst case of you saw that, and then what is important matters you regard most?
As a frontline investigator, the three most common mistakes we encounter, first of all, some companies still do not have an incident response plan. For the companies that do have an incident response plan in place, they do not include forensics as part of that plan. What happens then is when they realize they need a forensic investigation, they have to go through contacting companies, go through the vendor onboarding, gain approval from management. Unnecessary delays in the investigation process. The other mistake we see is companies go into panic mode, so they go straight into containment, straight to recovery. They restore the systems. They then realize IT cannot identify what data has been extracted, only the fact that data has been extracted. They then come to us and ask for us to do the forensic investigation. We can't do it. You've restored the systems, the electronic evidence is gone. So those are the three sort of mistakes. Now we're just about to wrap up. Before I hand you over to Kay for final words, I've just talked about DFI for 25 minutes. I'm going to sum up everything I've said in 2 sentences. Digital forensics provides the evidence and the understanding to the incident. Incident response provides the action and the recovery to the incident. I'll now hand you over for final words.
Thank you for your frontline experience. I like your two words that very simplifies like today's the summary. So I want to add one more thing I experienced as a disadvantaged investigator. And when I see that like instance happens and I went to your company, they most have problems that is communication. As Andrew mentioned about earlier, communication channels, things, it is a really important matter. So beforehand, something happened, please communicate with your team and the management and also related authorities and even like your outsourced partners. Why I mentioned this one, if there is no communication channels and not proper communication skills and stuff, then they will like lose their golden hour. That is actually most critical things in digital forensics. If you keeping doing good communication with your team and relevant people, they will give you an exact idea. Sometimes like they cannot find any answers. Also, please make also good relationship with digital forensic investigators as well. Thank you.